Hello everyone, and welcome to Export Development Canada's webinar, Tips on How to Grow Your Business in the U.S. Market. I'm Melanie Carter, an account manager here at EDC and the moderator for today's session. So just before we begin, please note that we are also webcasting today's session using simultaneous French translation. So if you would prefer to listen en français, simply click the français button that's on your screen. Alors pour notre auditoire francophone, nous offrons une traduction simultanée disponible sur votre écran. Veuillez tout simplement choisir le bouton français. So for those of you who are not as familiar with Export Development Canada, or EDC, I'll just mention that we are Canada's export credit agency. EDC helps Canadian companies, both large and small, from all sectors, to respond to international business opportunities. Each year, we help more than 7,000 Canadian businesses dealing in more than 200 markets worldwide to prosper and grow. The purpose of this webinar is to share some insights from exporting companies who are currently doing business in the United States. They will share their experiences with you and some key learnings that they found useful in this growing market. Joining me today is, first and foremost, Jen Kelly, co-founder of Pear Design, located in Toronto. So hello, Jen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And also we have here with us today Pierre Planger, CEO at Solacom, located in Gatineau.
How are you?
Also, we have David Weiner, who is a Senior Trade Commissioner at the Trade Commissioner Service, and he's responsible for the U.S. market. Welcome, David.
Hello, Melanie.
And last but not least, we have Gary Brown, our very own Chief Representative here, who takes care of the U.S. market for EDC.
Good afternoon.
And of course, I'd like to welcome all of you participants joining us on today's webinar. Our objective today is to ensure that you take away some key tips that will help your business strategies when you are entering the U.S. market. So today on the agenda, here's a few things that we'll be discussing. So an overview of the U.S. market and the various opportunities for Canadian companies. Also, we'll be talking with two customers, two exporting companies who have succeeded in the U.S. market. And also, we'll have tips from our guests on how to overcome some of the obstacles or challenges faced when exporting in this market. And then we'll be seeing how EDC and the trade commissioners can help you and your company. Now, before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that you will be able to ask questions to our panel members live at the end of today's session. So we'll also be, sending you a link to the archived version of this webinar. So if you miss a point, or if you want to review something, don't worry, you'll be able to do so at the end of this webinar. So let's get started. Let's start with David. David is joining us via telephone today from Texas. So thank you so much for joining us, David. Can you start by giving us a brief overview of the Trade Commissioner Service?
Well, thank you, Melanie, and certainly, and greetings all from Texas.
Thank you.
So a brief overview of the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service. Well, we've been around for 120 years, tracing our roots back to the first Canadian Trade Commissioner who was posted to Australia way back in 1894. Our brief is quite simple. We exist to help Canadian companies penetrate overseas markets and navigate the complexities of international trade. We can help you grow your company internationally, whether it's exporting a good or a service, or acquiring a new technology, or inputs from overseas, or investing abroad. The Trade Commissioner Service has Canada's most comprehensive network of international trade professionals. We have over 174 offices located in Canadian embassies, high commissions, and consulates around the world. Best of all, the services we provide Canadian companies are completely free of charge. What kind of services do we offer? Well, we have 4 basic services, Melanie. Those services are, first, preparation for international markets. This involves helping get your company ready for exporting before you leave Canada. Our second core service is a market potential assessment, where we will review your objectives in a foreign market and provide you intelligence on that country to help you determine whether you are likely to succeed in that market. TCS Insight can help save you time and money by avoiding the cost of trial and error approaches, which will allow you to concentrate on markets where you have a high likelihood of success. Our third service involves providing you with qualified contacts that can help you grow your business overseas. Our network of international contacts is truly unbeatable. Through our network of embassies and consulates around the world, we can help you access foreign governments, key business leaders, and decision makers. The Trade Commissioner Service can increase your credibility in foreign markets, helping you gain access to local contacts that would not normally be available to outside businesses. Some of the contacts we can provide you include foreign government officials, qualified potential buyers of your product, overseas agents, distributors, buyers, manufacturers, reps, importers, etc., as well as professional service providers such as law firms, international tax and financial service firms. Our fourth and final service involves problem solving or troubleshooting, and this can involve helping companies like yours solve a variety of issues that can arise outside of Canada, from dealing with shipments that don't quite make it across the border, that get stuck in customs, to all kinds of market access issues, including things like Buy American Act or other forms of foreign protectionist legislation, or perhaps getting a product registered in an overseas market. So in short, our hands-on knowledge that comes with years of experience helping thousands of companies like yours every year can help your business succeed globally. Research shows that companies that use the Trade Commissioner Service are more successful than those that do not. The value of their export sales on average is 18% greater than the export sales of companies that do not use the Trade Commissioner Service, and TCS clients access an average of 36% more market than those companies that do not use the service. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a free service for all Canadian companies. We're here to serve, and we look forward to seeing many new faces in the months and years to come.
That's great. Thank you so much, and such interesting statistics you left us with there, David. So given that this relates to the U.S. market, can you please give us a brief overview of any opportunities or trends that our audience should be aware of in terms of the U.S. market?
Well, first I would have to say that in most cases there's no better place to start exporting than the U.S. market. For starters, the United States is the largest, richest market in the world, and it is also Canada's largest export market, taking in over 70% of Canada's merchandise and service exports. The United States shares a similar business culture to that of Canada. It is located in the same time zones as Canada. It has a similar legal system, and you can often do business on open terms, so no need for letters of credit or other complex banking arrangements. And we have highly integrated value chains and markets with products moving across the border seamlessly on a daily basis. Most Canadians live in close proximity to the U.S., and it's not uncommon for the nearest big city to your business to actually be located in the United States instead of Canada. So it makes really good sense to take a closer look at the U.S. You know, one of the biggest challenges Canadian companies first face when considering the United States is the enormity or sheer size of the market. I remember studying German in school and being intimidated by some of the ginormous long words in German, often the combination of many smaller words. And my teacher reassured me that I could master the words, but that the secret was merely to break the words down into smaller pieces, tackling them one syllable at a time. And I find this strategy also works with the United States. Companies need to break the market down into smaller, bite-sized pieces, tackling the country in smaller chunks rather than the whole at once. The United States is often referred to as a market of markets, so it's important for companies to start tackling the United States by a region or by piece of the country where they feel most comfortable. This might be a city located just on the other side of the border from where you are located, or perhaps it's in a city with a cluster of companies that operate in the same sector as you, such as Silicon Valley for the IT sector, or Detroit in the automotive sector, or Houston for the energy sector, or a place where your business has strong business contacts already. It really doesn't matter where you start as long as you do your research or preparation and have a good business plan. The Trade Commissioner Service has offices across the United States that cover different regions of the U.S. For instance, my office is responsible for the state of Texas and the 4 states that border it: Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Each of our offices in the United States has a thorough understanding of the part of the United States that it covers and has an elaborate network of local contacts to help your business succeed. Each mission or consulate will have different priority sectors that reflect the opportunities in this territory they cover, so you might have to find out which consulate covers the sectors that you work on. You ask about sectors or trends in the market, Melanie, and that's a hard topic to address in just 5 minutes, but I can say that the sectors where Canadian companies are currently enjoying a lot of success in the U.S. it would be in the aerospace, automotive, agri-food, building product, forestry products, IT, energy, which includes oil, gas, and renewables, and life science sectors. And service companies are doing very well in the U.S. as well. But perhaps it would be more useful if I shared some tips, the tips that you were talking about doing business in the U.S. Right. And I'm going to share 3. And perhaps one of the most useful tips I can give you is to replicate your Canadian client base outside of Canada. So if you're in retail, for example, and sell to Walmart Canada, get your Walmart Canada contacts to introduce you to their counterparts in the United States. If you supply Ford Canada, you already have what it takes to be supplying Ford in the United States and other markets that Ford is present in around the world. So my advice is follow your clients and your supply chains across the border and around the world. And that brings me to my second related tip. As I mentioned earlier, the United States is the biggest, wealthiest market in the world, and is also one of the most innovative and competitive markets in the world, too. So it's little wonder, then, that companies from all around the world have set up operations in the United States.
Right, to be close
Often
to their
these businesses
clients.
are North American head offices for these foreign-owned companies that have responsibilities for both the United States and for Canada. So my tip is the following. If you're thinking about entering other foreign markets such as China, India, Brazil, Germany, or even Mexico, the best way to enter those markets might actually be through the United States. You'll find it much less expensive and easier to meet the people you need to meet in the corporation's U.S. operations than you would overseas. When I was in Detroit, for example, we were able to get companies from Canada to access the senior-most leadership in Japanese companies here in the U.S. And meet leaders that they would never have a chance to meet in Japan just because society is a little more rigid and structured in Japan. So it's not just the foreign-owned companies that can take you around the world by getting into their global supply chains. Many big American companies also operate on a global basis. And if they are happy with the goods or services you provide them here in the U.S., chances are that you can go overseas with them as well. Simply put, companies like to work with companies they know and companies that they can depend on with quality goods and services. So I'm just going to give you one last tip, and that is if your company is woman-owned, Aboriginal-owned, or minority-owned, learn more about supplier diversity programs here in the U.S. Virtually all American companies have a supplier diversity program. The objective of these programs is for companies to have supply chains that better reflect the population at large and to help groups typically underrepresented in supply chains access them. Why? Well, studies show that companies that have more diverse supply chains tend to be more profitable than those that don't. And the good news is that there are reciprocity agreements in place that allow Canadian companies that are certified in Canada to benefit from many of the same benefits that American women and minority-owned businesses enjoy here in the States. And many of these corporations have dedicated supplier diversity buyers whose performance pay, along with C-suite performance pay, is based on their ability to get more minority and women-owned businesses into their supply chain. And they work with companies. They help them succeed. They help them with their marketing approach. They don't just want to get you in the supply chain. They want to keep you there. In the food sector, we've seen tremendous results with companies going from a first introduction to food store shelves within 6 months. They'll do things like waive the slotting fees, which could be $20,000 per SKU item. So if you're in the ice cream business, that's $20,000 for vanilla and $20,000 for chocolate, just to put your product onto this grocery shelf.
It sounds like you have great, tons of great information to share with any Canadian companies who want to do business in the U.S. And as you couldn't see them, but Jennifer and Pierre were actually nodding as you were, saying how to approach the U.S. market and it being a kind of a mosaic rather than one whole market. So I thank you for that. I know that you work very closely with Gary, our chief rep here at EDC. So Gary, I'm going to turn to you and I'm going to ask you, what have you seen in terms of Canadian companies wanting to go in the U.S.? Like, what have been their challenges? What have you been seeing most?
I think one of the biggest challenges, the initial challenge for Canadian companies, and following on what David said, if they're not fortunate enough to be in the supply chain of one of the big companies in Canada, how do you get into the supply chain of a big company in the U.S.? How do you get that introduction, get that first door open to you where you get in to talk to the right person? And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, especially for small companies. How do you make that first foray and get talking to the right people in your target companies, and especially if they're the large, potentially multinationals?
Right. Excellent. So, let's move on to our two exporters here. So, first and foremost, Jen, what is it that you've seen in terms of going into the U.S.? What have been? Let me ask you this first. What do you do? What is Pear Designs all about?
Pear is a wholesaler and designer of home accessories. Okay. So myself and my business partner, Becca Perrin, started Pear in 2011. Okay. We launched it at the New York Gift Show in the January of that year. Becca and I have actually been friends for a very long time, and we started working on the business plan and business development when we were on our first maternity leave together, and that's where all of the pieces started coming together. So right before our first children were one, we launched the business, and as I said, we launched at a trade show in the US, and then we started shipping to stores in the summer of that year. Since then, we launched a baby line last year, and we've also included additional home accessories. We started in tabletops, we were doing placemats and napkins and tea towels, and now we have storage and other home accessories in our baby line.
Wonderful. So after hearing David and Gary, what have you found were the challenges as you were trying to export in the U.S. market?
Well, I could relate a lot to what Gary and David were talking about in terms of some of the challenges, just setting up and finding kind of your niche within the market. So we started selling as our first kind of customer base was in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And we were building our customer base and had more and more retailers carrying our product. And we found that one of the big barriers for them was that they had to pay customs and duties in order for the products to come over the border so that they could sell it. So it was an additional cost on top of the price they were already paying. So eventually what we did was started working with a warehouse in the US. So we had a warehousing facility there, started shipping the majority of our goods to the US. Mm-hmm. So we could ship direct to the US customer out of the US warehouse and remove all of those barriers in terms of customs and duty and that type of thing. So that was a big kind of hurdle to overcome in that instance. And definitely helped our business excel by opening up that door for them.
Thank you so much. So if any of you out there can relate to Jen's experience, I do encourage you to give us a call at 1-888-361-6811. Again, 1-888-361-6811 for more information. An account manager will be happy to take your call and answer any questions that you might have. So Pierre, you're next. Let me ask you a little bit about Solacom and what they do.
Okay, so Solacom, we do 911 products, so we design them here in the National Capital Region, and we manufacture them here and ship them in the U.S. and through partnerships, resellers get them installed over there, and then we support them through local Tier 1 support organization, and we also have an operations center to back them up here. So our products do 911 call delivery and call taking.
Excellent. So like Jen told us about her obstacles, let me ask you about what have been the obstacles as you have been trying to build your business and grow your business in the U.S.
So as you can imagine, 911 has to do with public safety. And David was talking about some of the I'm not sure if he mentioned the Patriot Act, but he mentioned some of the acts, and the Americans can be protectionists sometimes. And in our case, it's very important to look as American as you can look. And so we need to bridge the gap between our organization and the local market. And Gary was talking about the importance of you know, identifying the right partners, and EDC can help exporters. We also have enough experience now that we're able to identify potential partners in local markets, and as David was saying, the U.S. is a big mosaic of customers, and not everyone operates the same way, although there's a lot of similarities. You do need to have a local partner. The local partner in Texas will bring you some customer intimacy from the customer base over there, and the local partner in Boston will bring you a different set of knowledge about the local market. So our challenge is in appearing as American as we can, but that is done through different things, but among them is that local partnerships of dealers, value-added resellers.
Excellent. So that's how you overcame the challenges,
Yes.
finding people who will make you look like you are part of them. So depending on what you do, Jen's company is a little more, you know, retail type, you know, consumer based, and you're more service. So you know that your goods need to please the audience that you're going to be selling to. So your goods need to please. In your case, the company needs to please the audience. So Gary, would you agree with that statement?
I think so. And talking before we came on the air, it was very interesting in the different perspectives that the different sectors bring, different challenges. There's no one size fits all. As David mentioned, it's a market of markets, and knowing your own sector and your own expertise is going to help what will work in your sector, because it's in another sector it may just not be a relevant point at all. Absolutely.
So I want to thank everyone. We began this session by promising some tips on how to enter the U.S. markets, and telling people how companies have overcome those challenges. I hope we've accomplished part of that, but we want to say that the period to answer questions is coming up shortly. So whether you are exporting to the U.S. or anywhere else outside of Canada, EDC can help you grow your business. We have a suite of products and solutions that are available to you, such as insurance for your receivables in case of non-payment from one of your customers, or export market knowledge as well. We have ways to help you gain access to more financing and working capital from your bank. If you are exporting or thinking about exporting, please give us a call again at 1-888-361-6811 to speak to one of our knowledgeable staff. So the time for the open question period is starting now. So we'll try to squeeze in as many questions as possible. So if you'd like to ask a question, please click on the Q&A button on the lower left-hand side of your screen. So let's begin. I'll be taking the questions right here. I guess we'll be trying to get some more tips from our panel members here, trying to, to see if companies can relate and answer questions. So here's the first question. If I sell products in the U.S., do I have to register with IRS and pay tax in the U.S.? Do I pay tax in Canada as well? So maybe David and Gary may be able to respond to such a question. Can you?
I think that's more of a question for David. EDC isn't really in the regulatory business.
I'll try and answer in a very general way, but of course each case is unique. One thing that basically the basic rule of thumb is if you're invoicing from Canada, so you're exporting directly from Canada, there's no local sales presence in a state, then you generally would not need to pay U.S. taxes. You wouldn't need to collect sales tax. But if you have a presence in the U.S. Or if you're making that sale in the U.S., then generally you would need to pay U.S. taxes. And in Canada, it's a little more complicated, but basically corporations pay tax on their global earnings, global profits.
Excellent. So, maybe touching on the fact that, Jen, you've introduced warehousing in the U.S. So can you tell us a little bit about how warehousing goods in the U.S. can reduce the custom and duty costs on imported Canadian goods?
Sure. So originally when we started selling goods to the U.S., to our U.S. customers, we had a warehouse in Canada. We were bringing the goods in where we manufacture them in India, landing them in Canada, and then shipping them from Canada to our U.S. customer. So very much like when we buy something online or from the U.S. and it's shipped to Canada, we often have to pay some duty on it. So the same thing was happening for our U.S. customers. So they would be buying it at the retail price, and then on top of that, they would have to add on the additional duty costs. So in some cases, it would make the cost too prohibitive for some of our customers, and others were willing to do it. But once we were able to start warehousing a lot of the goods in the U.S., we could ship them directly from India, where we were producing them, into the U.S. to our U.S. warehouse, and then we removed the duties for our U.S. customers, so they didn't have to worry about any additional duties or taxes on top of the cost of goods.
That's great. So is there a tip or a piece of advice that you would like to give our customers about selling in the U.S. specifically?
I would say that much to what we've all talked about here in terms of taking it piece by piece, as it is, a mosaic, and there are many pieces to it, is just to, it's okay to learn as you go, and to use the resources that you have, like EDC and other resources, talking to other business owners to understand what their experience is, and everyone will have unique challenges as they go through the process, but it's just doing, as much research as you can, and just calling and asking questions. So learning as you go is okay, and it doesn't have to be, it may seem a bit daunting to be selling in the U.S. or to be selling to U.S. customers, but you can really take it one step at a time.
Pierre, I'm going to ask you the same question. Any tips or piece of advice you'd like to give as some of our audience might be looking into selling into the U.S.?
Yeah, in our case, I forgot to mention that 90% of what we sell is actually sold in the U.S. So for us, it is very important to look as American as we can be, and that could be perhaps daunting for a Canadian company that doesn't right now export to the U.S. But during lunch, we were talking about that local presence and how that local presence is different from one company to another one. So it's important to look at it as a step-by-step approach. Like I said, we're exporting 90% of what we're producing to the U.S., so we do have U.S. employees, we do have an office in Chicago. Right. So that local presence is quite a commitment for us. But for someone else, it could just be attending a trade show and getting to do the first step and learning the market. And as Jen was saying, you have to be willing to learn through those experiences, and you'll make mistakes, but you have to continue. And you have to modulate that local presence to your reality.
Right. And for the companies who are starting out and don't necessarily have local presence in the market of interest, Gary, what would you say is the first approach as they're starting to get closer to their clients in the U.S.?
Well, I think finding a way, how are they going to get themselves introduced to those clients? And that's one of the things that EDC and the Trade Commissioner Service can help with, whether it's trade shows, industry missions, inbound, outbound, that kind of thing, using our network of buyers to provide introductions. And my experience in that scenario is companies, even though it's that first step, maybe they're small, they need to come across as being professional and qualified, and whether that's their one-pager that profiles what they do, or when they get that meeting at the trade show, make sure their presentation brings across the 2 or 3 things that they want that potential key buyer for them to take away, and be ready for that first step. And as we talked earlier, step by step, you're not going to hit the home run or the grand slam the first time out. Jen talked about their first trade show in Chicago or in New York, and how relatively it was small, but they were very happy with that and they grew it along. But I think being ready, like understanding that this is the chance, you only get one chance to make a first impression, an old cliche, but it's very true. And have people remember you for what it is you want them to think about when they're thinking about that company they met at the trade show.
And so logistically, how does EDC partner with those companies as they are going into these trade shows? Are we physically at trade shows sometimes?
Quite often, yeah. We'll be at the trade shows, and typically what would happen at a large trade show is we'll find out who the Canadians are that are attending. We'll provide their profiles to the companies that are attending that we know from the U.S. in this case that are attending, and they'll look at the profiles and then indicate who they want to meet. And it may be a relatively small number of companies that fit the kind of thing they're looking for. And then we can facilitate meetings either at the booths at the trade show, sometimes off-site at the buyers' offices, or we've arranged meeting rooms, that kind of thing. But setting up a one-on-one so they get that. Lots of times it's kind of like speed dating, the 15 or 20 minutes, and they get a chance to make their pitch. And that's, but it's opening that door to a company in the U.S., a potential buyer that wants to talk to them because they've read their profile and they think this is somebody they'd like to deal with.
Excellent. So I might be catching you off guard here, but do you have a sense of how many trade show EDC attends in the U.S. specifically on a yearly basis?
Oh, you are catching me off guard. I don't know, a dozen, maybe somewhere in there, 15 to 20, something like that. It depends on the sector. Some sectors, trade shows are a lot more part of that sector activity than some of the others. In the oil and gas space, the Offshore Technology Conference in Houston is one of the biggest in the world that we attend annually. That's the only one we attend every year in the U.S. But on the retail side, I know there's a number of shows that people attend. I personally haven't been involved, but there's quite a few.
Excellent, thank you. David, maybe you want to touch on that as well. Logistically, how is it that you help a Canadian company who wants to establish themselves in the U.S.? Do you meet with them when they go to trade shows, or do you help with introductions at such trade shows, or do you put together trade shows or matchmaking events?
Well, we do it in so many different ways. First of all, we provide one-on-one direct support, whether that's making contacts, making introductions. We certainly are present in trade shows, and often we will do matchmaking events on the side. We're doing that right now at Greenfield in Louisiana. But we also do supplier days where we try and introduce Canadians to large corporations and get them into their supply chain. We'll profile the Canadian companies, and the supplier, the buyer will decide, the manufacturer will decide which Canadian companies they want to meet. So we're doing one this week in Florida with our consulate in Miami and our consulate in Sao Paulo at Embraer, which is a Brazilian aerospace company. They've just set up a new manufacturing facility in Florida. We're trying to get Canadian aerospace companies into their supply chain. And in a very similar way, in the first week of December, we'll be doing one with Bell Helicopter here in Texas. So there are many different ways. It can be direct one-on-one client support to Canadian companies that are looking to export, one of the 4 services I described. But it could also be at trade shows. It could be matchmaking. It could be a supplier day.
Excellent, thank you. This next question that came from one of our audience members might be answered by you, David, and then maybe Pierre and Jen, you may be able to relate given your experience. But here it goes. As a Canadian, can I purchase products in the U.S. and then sell them both in the U.S. and Canada? And then can I warehouse in the U.S. and do I need to start a business there if I do want to operate or have a warehouse in the USA?
Well, that's a lot of different parts to one question, but I'll try my best to answer it. Yes, you can buy products in the U.S. and sell them in the U.S. You can buy products or components for something you're making in Canada and the U.S. and bring them into Canada. Of course, there would be duties bringing them into Canada unless under NAFTA, if it was made in the United States or Mexico, then you might be able to bring it in duty-free. You can certainly have a warehouse in the U.S. You do not need to be incorporated in the U.S. to have a warehouse space. One of the easiest things might be to have a bonded warehouse where you can defer paying duties and taxes if you're bringing something in from overseas or from Canada and you want to keep it temporarily in the U.S. or just pay the duties later when you're actually ready to sell that good or service. And there are firms that will manage a small piece of the whatever size of a larger warehouse they'll pull your product out for you and things like that.
Excellent. So the way that you remain close to your client could be, you know, having a full-on manufacturing company in the U.S. if you wanted to, but it could be just an office where you have as few salespeople, like you at Solicom, correct?
Yeah, actually, in some cases we do count the amount of U.S. content that we have in our products, and it's been helpful because we can increase it. You can buy, in our case, we're a computer-based solution, server-based, so you can buy the products from the U.S. and therefore you increase your American contact, because in certain cases they do want to have as much American content as you can.
Right.
Now, specifically in this example here, what I would caution someone is in our case, we had to be careful with warranties, because if we buy servers and we integrate them in Canada and then we ship them back in the US, sometimes some companies don't transfer those warranties. So you just have to work out those little issues. They're not big issues, but if you know about them, you'll just avoid some mistakes.
Be well aware as you're going into the
Yeah, it's not that complex though.
Yeah, of course. Jen, can you relate to what David just said? He mentioned bonded warehouse as an example. You don't have, I believe you don't have an actual operating facility in the U.S.
We work with a third-party logistics company to warehouse and basically to help fulfill orders, to ship them out to our customer in the U.S. So we actually work with a company that has warehouses both in Canada and the U.S. So we went that route so that we could have a bit of symmetry kind of in the back end office in terms of order processing and all of that. So we work with the same company in both countries.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, they warehouse the product along with many other companies' products. And then we can ship them out directly to our U.S. and international customers from there.
Interesting, thank you. So another question from the members of the audience here. So with the loonie at a low exchange rate versus USD, how do you work around these issues in the short term? So maybe starting with you, Jen.
Yeah, this was actually something that I think doing a lot of business in the U.S., and I know you do 90% of your business there, and we do about 75% of our business in the U.S. We had to make sure that we were set up from a order processing and payment standpoint so that we were receiving U.S. funds. Initially, when we set ourselves up, even with credit card processing and that type of thing, the funds were being converted to Canadian, and then we'd be having to pay U.S. bills, and so we were always having to manage what was happening with the dollar. And so now we're set up so that all of our processing happens in U.S. So we receive funds in U.S. that go into a U.S. bank account, and we can better manage all of our incoming and outgoing dollars. So that definitely helps to offset any issues with having to worry about where the loonie's at, because it seems to change on a daily basis.
Indeed.
So that helps offset some of that risk for sure.
Pierre?
In our case, we sell our products based on U.S. dollars, so the price doesn't change to the customer, but the margin improves dramatically. So,
I see.
So we love the decreasing loonie.
Yeah.
But someone who may be considering exporting from Canada, and obviously it makes their product less expensive if they are used to selling it in Canadian dollars. But the Americans will want to buy it obviously in U.S. dollars. So.
Indeed.
Decreasing loonie is only good for exports.
Right, yes, indeed. So Gary, do you have any advice or tips to give our customers as the loonies is fluctuating up or down, how companies can maybe protect themselves against that?
Well, I mean, clearly you can hedge, the classic risk management tools are hedging. Obviously setting up your business, like Jen mentioned, where they're selling in U.S. dollars and probably buying most of their goods from India in U.S. dollars. Yeah. It just takes the loonie out of the play altogether. So those kinds of things are virtually free. They're not. Whereas if you have FX and you're going to manage hedge accounts, there's a cost to that from the banks who do that for you. So if you can do it without having to spend money, that's even better.
Right, so the financial institutions and boutique financial institutions have tons of great information to provide Canadian companies as they are going out and having to deal with different currencies. So definitely something to look out for. So the next question, what would be the best way to ship goods to the U.S.? Canada Post, UPS, or other options? So Jennifer, you clearly have actual goods crossing the border, so you might be able to answer this.
I think we've tried everything, and generally we work with one of the large courier companies, and you can set up accounts with them. So whether it's FedEx or UPS, or and they have preferred rates. So the more business you do, essentially, the better your rates are, and that for the most part is easier and a bit more seamless than Canada Post. So you can get pickup. It just makes it, from a small business perspective, you can spend less time worrying about the logistical side, generally if you're working with one of the larger courier companies.
So Pierre, at Pear, they're moving goods, but in your case, are you moving?
Yeah, we are actually.
Are you moving goods, and are you actually exporting your employees for a little while? Like, do you do any type of training? Do you have to send your employees to the U.S.?
You have to be careful with working in the U.S. So you do need permits. But as I think I said earlier, we have 8 or 9 employees in the U.S. So when it comes to training, we can address it from that employee base in the U.S. And we did relocate one employee in the U.S., so you have to go through the system. It's not easy.
Right.
But I would probably advise a Canadian company who's looking at having feet on the ground in the U.S. I would suggest that there's a lot of good people you can hire as consultants who can help you out, and just be flexible with the agreement. Don't lock yourself into an agreement with someone, because as you grow you may want to have your own people on your payroll, but perhaps at the beginning you want to have a contractor who's an American, and you don't have to worry about all the paperwork associated with obtaining a work permit.
Exactly. There are hurdles when it comes to this, and I know there's a lot of paperwork involved, and so you overcame these hurdles by having people posted there. So, David, is there any advice you would give in terms of moving goods across the borders or moving employees across the borders?
Oh, yeah, I'll try and give a little bit of advice on both. It depends who your end customer is. If you need to provide a door-to-door service, so maybe you're selling to a retail customer, then courier services, international courier services, are probably the best option, but they are expensive. If you're sending larger shipments with some regularity, you're much better off working with a freight forwarder that can consolidate freight to save you money if you don't have full container load shipments, and they can also provide the customs brokerage services on either side of the border. So that's a good way to go. As far as people, I'll just mention one thing that hasn't been mentioned, because a lot of good ideas have already been mentioned. Something that's not so well known is the U.S. E1 and E2 visas, the treaty trader, treaty investor visas. This is a non-immigrant visa. It's for a Canadian company that does a large share of its business in the U.S., much like Pierre's company. And what that allows them to do is send Canadians down. It's a 5-year visa. It's renewable, unlike the H visas. And because it's a non-immigrant visa, there's no need for the employee to actually live in the U.S. So if you need to send a technician to service equipment on a regular basis, but you want to keep the technician in Canada, you could get the E1 or E2 visa and send them down to the U.S. just to do some short-term work and then come back to Canada. If they do choose to reside in the U.S., their spouses can work, which is great. And once the first employee is approved with a company, it only takes about a week for the U.S. consulate to issue any subsequent visas for that company. And it does have to be a Canadian company, and the citizenship of the visa applicants also needs to be Canadian.
Thank you so much for this advice, David. Did I cut you off there? Is there something else you wanted to bring forward?
No.
Okay, great, thank you. A customer here is asking if there's good or bad reasons to or if there's good reasons to register a company or incorporate in the U.S., like for Delaware, for example. I guess a lot of us have seen that. David, could you talk to the benefits or the disadvantages of having a registered company in the U.S. as opposed to not?
Yeah, again, it's probably good for a company to seek some legal and tax advice before jumping into that decision. and deciding how they're going to incorporate in the U.S. or if they're going to register in the U.S. But Delaware is a common location because it has a very good business legal system. So if you want to have a good legal system in case there are any cases against you, that's a good choice of a place to incorporate. But yes, establishing a legal presence in the U.S. has many advantages. It gives you that U.S. It gives your customers a sense that they're dealing with a U.S. entity rather than a Canadian entity, and there's a whole bunch of advantages there. If you're trying to sell to government in the U.S., whether it's state or federal, having that U.S. presence can also give you certain benefits. But it's something that a company needs to study thoroughly and understand what the tax and legal impacts are going to be on their company before they do that.
Indeed, so you can talk with their lawyers, with consulting firms to all try to assess what is the best route for the company depending on the stage where they're at, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And if they were going to manufacture, there are different states and cities that offer incentives to attract business. We can help in the Trade Commissioner Service across the U.S. Help a company assess what would be in their interest, what might be useful for them to consider when they're looking at entering a specific market.
Excellent.
I think maybe just one point following on
Yes.
that in terms of, it was kind of mentioned before in terms of following your buyers, but if you deal with an accounting firm or a legal firm in Canada that has a presence in the U.S., that's a perfect way to get advice on how you might move there and with someone you already know here, instead of going down and trying to find legal advice or an accounting firm to deal with. If you're dealing with somebody here that very likely has the kind of relationship, they could refer you to someone in the U.S.
Excellent. So this question may be addressed to David once again. So we are seriously looking at opening a development center, so IT consulting services in Texas. Is there any fiscal incentive for this activity in Texas, similar to the one in upstate New York?
Yes, there are, and they can be fairly complex. The best thing to do would be to give me a call, and we can go through what the state offers and then what individual communities are offering on top of that.
Right. Thank you. Next question. If you are looking at expansion in the U.S. market, how is the best way for a smaller company to get the local market intel? So, Gary.
Well, again, it's working networks. The Trade Commissioner Services, they have, I think, 50 trade commissioners in 16 offices that essentially cover the U.S., so that's not a bad place to start. You can always access them through EDC. We work with them all the time. The different industry associations that you might look to sell into, those kinds of networks are probably where you'll find that
And you did
information.
mention the supply chain. So if you're dealing with someone in Canada that also deals in the U.S., taking advantage of these contacts, right? The networks and the contacts, I feel, go a long, long way for companies to be successful internationally. So whether they're your own contacts or whether they're the contacts of someone else you're speaking with, whether the trade commissioners or EDC or anyone else, big law firms or whatever, definitely it gives the companies a boost to grow, to continue to grow. So this company here is saying such that they are just starting a company where we have the product manufactured and warehoused in the U.S. and will sell it in both Canada and the U.S. through free agents into the distribution network. We do not have any offices in the U.S., but hope to make the sell to the U.S. and Canadian customers. Any advice? So hold on, let me reframe that for you. Starting a new company is going to be manufactured in the U.S. It will be both sold in the U.S. and in Canada through free agents. In fact, I don't necessarily know what free agents are. So David, do you want to touch on that? Do you have a sense of?
Well, but by agents, I guess they're talking about they have companies that represent them and that would be selling their product to end users.
By free agents, maybe they mean on commission?
Or a fee agent?
Yeah, probably.
That's often the case, or they'll act as a distributor. They'll buy at one price and resell at the other.
Okay.
And it's very common for companies to manufacture a product in one country and use it in the U.S. and use it to serve both U.S. and Canadian markets. I still don't quite know where the question is there, but we work with companies like that all the time and would be glad to provide any advice that the company requires.
Yeah, calling in either to EDC or to the Trade Commissioner Service would be a good idea. So David, you did mention that you had trade commissioners posted internationally, but I know that you have a lot of trade commissioners in Canada as well. So what is the best approach that a company should utilize to be in touch with you? Should they be talking with someone domestically first, or should they seek out to be speaking with the trade commissioner who is posted in the market of interest?
I think that's really a question of how ready the company feels it is for the U.S. market or for international market. Both are valid approaches. We do have international trade offices in every province. Provinces themselves also usually provide some services to companies located within the province. But we are hungry for business, I can say, here in Dallas, and we love to help companies directly. If we feel they're not quite ready, we'll let them know and put them in touch with people back at home that can help get them ready. But yes, they can certainly contact the mission directly anywhere in the world. A good way to find us would be to check out our web pages. They would be www.thecityname, so in my case it would be www.dallas.gc for Government of Canada.ca for Canada.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And Gary, where would be the best place to search where EDC will be participating in matchmaking events or trade shows?
Probably finding who your local EDC rep is. Talk to them about where you'd like to go, where you're interested in going. We don't necessarily have a list of the shows that we're attending. It's an industry-specific thing, but getting in touch with your local person in Canada. We have offices across Canada, and they can certainly put you in touch with the right people.
And in fact, calling our 1-800 number would certainly guide them through to the right account manager if ever if they didn't have one already. So I'll repeat the number. The number is 1-888-361-6811. So on to the next question. Probably to David again. So if we are trying to reach several sectors in the U.S., what would be the best location for a warehouse? So we talked about how the U.S. is a mosaic and how different parts of the country have different ways to enter it appropriately, maybe. Is there one area where it's easy access to all?
No, really, it's a function of what works best for the company and for its clients. So if a company needs to be relatively close to where its goods are in the U.S., you might want a location just across the border. That might be easiest to manage. If all of your customers tend to be clustered in one place in the U.S., I gave the example of Silicon Valley or Detroit for automotive or Houston for energy, then you might also want to consider having that warehouse closer to where that industry cluster is or where your biggest customers are. But I would tend to go myself with something close to the border. If something goes wrong, you can go there and work out any issues. If it's halfway across the continent, well, then you're going to have to travel there and deal with the issues from a distance.
Traveling to California too often would be unfortunate indeed.
Especially in winter.
Yeah, exactly. Pierre, you wanted to add something to this?
So not knowing specifically what this company does, in our case, Chicago was a perfect location, and the reason was we have I think I may have mentioned it before, but 230 centers answering 911 calls across the U.S. We need to repair the equipment, and so we get parts shipped throughout the U.S. and Chicago being a big airport, it's a natural hub. You could find Dallas could be also a good hub, but when it comes to moving products across the border, we have them all shipped to Chicago, our Chicago office, and then we're shipping them in Gatineau, in our case, to get them fixed. But turnaround is very important for us. We need to get the parts quickly, and we need to repair them quickly, and Chicago was a great strategy. So the point being, a large airport may be also a good location, a city that has a large airport.
Very interesting. Jen, how did you decide on where to have your warehouse?
Well, it's similar, looking for the hub that makes the most sense, I think, for where you're bringing your products in from. In our case, we're bringing them from India into the U.S., so it was really important to be at a port which could receive them, which would also have a warehouse close by. So for us, that port is New Jersey, and then there are multiple warehouses and facilities in that area, and there are different ports throughout the U.S. where you can do that, provide similar kind of functions. So I think the hub piece is really important, and looking at where you're bringing the product into the U.S. or where it needs to leave the U.S., and then looking for facilities in those areas.
Wonderful. Thanks for that advice. So training and U.S. trade shows, do they require working visas?
Trade shows, no.
No?
I mean, trade shows are, you can attend trade shows on a normal, you just have to declare to the custom officer that you're going to a trade show. What's key is you can't work in the U.S. without a work permit, although David gave some clarifications, but you do need a work permit. Attending a trade show is not a problem. Training, we use American employees, so I'm not sure how easy, and David maybe should provide some help here, but I'm not sure how easy it would be to get the permit. I don't think it's so hard, but we selected to do it through U.S. employees.
To U.S. employees, yes.
Yeah, everything Pierre said is correct. You certainly do not require a visa to be at a trade show. Training, generally not, as long as the person who's doing the training isn't performing any work. So if they're going to be manufacturing something while they're training, that's one of those gray areas that work permit may be required.
Excellent. David, you spoke a little bit about U.S. certification for Aboriginal women and minority suppliers. Could you expand a little more on that?
Okay, well, there are two organizations in Canada that certify, one that certifies Aboriginal and minority-owned businesses. It's called CAMC, the Canadian Aboriginal and Minority Supplier Council, and I believe WeConnect is the one that certifies women-owned businesses. And if you meet the certification requirements, usually you have to have 51% of the ownership of the company in the hands of a woman or a minority. Visible minority, we call them in Canada, then you can get the certification, and that certification will be recognized by the American certifying organization's counterpart. So this will give you the ability to enter big corporations through their supplier diversity programs, often with dedicated supplier diversity buyers, who will then introduce you to the other supply chain buyers within the corporation. Their performance pay, the C-suite's performance pay, all depends on, in part, on how they perform. They get a report card usually at the end of the year. It says how the company is doing in terms of getting more minority-owned and women-owned businesses into their supply chain. And it can make a huge difference for companies as they can get lots of support. This is all private sector. It's all voluntary. There are set-asides in U.S. procurement law for women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and small businesses. But these set-asides are only for American-owned companies, not for foreign-owned companies.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. So thank you very much for being here, everyone. This is all the time we have for today. So if we haven't had time to answer your questions, just hold on. I'll let you know how to go ahead and send us those questions so that we can either answer you via phone or email. So please feel free to contact us by emailing us at marketing@edc.ca. That is marketing@edc.ca, or call us at 1-888-361-6811. I'd also like to remind our participants that they'll be able to review today's presentation on our website. You'll be receiving an email from EDC with a link to access the archived webinar. So if you'd like to learn more about various markets, just go to our website and look under the Knowledge Center. You'll find there a ton of information and resources there. And we really do want to thank everyone for participating today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.